Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blissful one, the worthy one, the fully enlightened one. Some people who visit monasteries have the assumption that monasteries must be a peaceful place, a place where everyone always gets along, no one has a cross word for anyone, no one has a bad thought about anyone. But actually, human beings are human beings everywhere, until, of course, they attain higher stages of understanding. And whether or not a monastery is a peaceful place actually depends upon the actions of the people who are there. What do I mean by actions? There are three kinds of actions described by the Buddha. Actions by the body, physical behaviors. Actions of speech, breaking out into words. And actions of the mind, thinking, pondering. Now, of course, what makes the actions of body and speech significant are the fact of the mental movements that caused them first. You had a lot of thinking that got intensified enough to break out into speech, or a lot of thinking that got intensified enough to break out into the intention to act in this or that way. I'd like to share with you a story of one time when a monastery was not in harmony, in order to help us see what we might do in our own lives to behave a little bit better and to have more harmony with our loved ones. And then I'll share in contrast a story of some monks who lived together in great harmony. Once, during the day of the Buddha, there was a group of monks living in a monastery called Kosambi. Some monks had come together for a 3-month retreat, the annual 3-month rainy season retreat. And some monks had come in from the countryside, joining the monks who already were there. The monks who had come in from the countryside, if I recall the commentarial details correctly, had more focus on the suttas, the discourses, the teachings. They were not so involved in all the particulars, the details of the Vinaya disciplinary code practice. The monks who had already been there had more focus on that. A monk who was a leader, a teacher of the resident monks, he was more focused on Vinaya, and he stayed in the same room with the teacher of the incoming group. And addition, in the night, the teacher of the incoming group had to urinate, and he just put the urine aside and didn't dispose of it in some proper manner. And in the morning, the resident monk confronted him and said, "You broke a rule." And the incoming monk said, "I don't think I broke any rule." He said, "Yes, you did. You didn't dispose of the urine properly." And he said, "This is a minor thing. I didn't break any rule. Go on with you." Well, this other monk, the resident monk, was actually quite offended over what had happened. And he was doubly offended that the other monk didn't confess and apologize. He went and he told his students. And his students were talking, "Oh, this monk is like thus and such." And the monk who was being talked about like that heard about it. And he became angry. And he told his students the real story about this resident teacher. And the quarrel grew. Students took sides with, the teacher that they preferred. And then the laity got all involved, and they started taking sides. And the quarrel grew, and it got worse and worse. And the words became like verbal daggers, people attacking each other, attacking each other's personalities, their characters. It is said that the quarrel became so bitter and intense that even the deities themselves took sides, and the quarrel went up to the realm of the Brahmas. I don't really believe that. But, I mean, maybe it did. Maybe it did. So perhaps that was just tossed in there, though, to convey that it was quite a bitter struggle. The Buddha himself was staying there. And a monk approached him and said, Lord, they're attacking each other with verbal daggers. Please, situation. And the Lord Buddha went to them and he talked to them actually quite a bit. And he gave them a beautiful teaching. He said, monks, there are 6 ways that one becomes dear to one's co-residents. He said that one maintains bodily actions that are based on loving kindness. How did he put it? It's qualities that create love and respect and conduce to helpfulness, to non-dispute, to concord, to unity. What are the 6? Here, a bhikkhu maintains bodily acts of loving kindness both in public and in private towards his companions in the holy life. This is a memorable quality that creates love and respect and conduces to helpfulness, to non-dispute, to concord, to unity. Now, what do we mean by bodily acts of loving kindness? Like, you're living with somebody, perhaps. Maybe it's not your turn to take out the garbage, but you could just do it. Wouldn't that be a loving thing to do? Or you could slip out and warm up the car for somebody who has to get up early and go to work, and let that other person have that nice little comfort, those little gestures. Buying flowers would be another way. Cooking a meal. There's so many things that you can do just to say, you know, I care. A bhikkhu maintains verbal acts of loving kindness. That's the second one. Both in public and in private toward his companions in the holy life. To actually say, I care about you. To be gentle in one's speech. To be cautious and restrained in how you speak to other people that you live with. It matters. And they may remember some little thing you said long after you've forgotten it, whether a positive thing or a negative thing, as you probably already know all too well. Again, a bhikkhu maintains mental acts of loving kindness, both in private and in public, towards his companions in the holy life. And this also creates love and respect and conduces to unity. When you're sitting around thinking about these people you live with, how do you think about them? Do you think about all the wrong things? How they're never patient? How they're like this, like that, they're always late? Well, instead of thinking how they're always late, perhaps you could think, you know, this person really likes to find an opportunity to help other people. Or this person really gets focused and engrossed in what he's doing. That's why he does such a good job. Or you could think, oh, so many good qualities. There's nobody who's wholly bad. You probably just had a name jump to mind. Oh yes, so-and-so is wholly bad. No, she isn't. Or no, he isn't. Not really. Everyone has at least some little redeeming quality. If nothing else, you can make up a redeeming quality. At least he hasn't killed somebody. Or at least she hasn't killed anyone recently. You can make up something. And if you make the effort, that in itself is enough to turn your mind in a positive direction. Why do you want to do that? When you turn your mind in a positive direction, you feel good. And when you have good thoughts associated with a person, then your heart opens towards them. Try just a little bit. Give it a shot. So those were the 3 actions of body, speech, and mind. What else did he recommend? He said that a bhikkhu uses things in common without any kind of reservation. That is, sharing, being generous. Are you tight with the wallet with your loved one? More than necessary? Do you share? Do you get upset when your friend or your companion uses your special ink pen? That's not very nice, is it? Can you be generous? Can you let go just a little bit? Just for harmony, just to be nice. And then another one that he said is that one is virtuous. One conducts oneself in a way that's going to lead to a calm home, a calm environment, not doing outrageous things. You know what virtue is. You can do it a little more, perhaps. And And then the sixth one, he put in terms of right view, but I think we could generalize in terms of that one is generally focused on spiritual development. If you put spiritual development as the primary thing in life, as what you center around, then everything else really falls into place very nicely. And that is also very conducive to harmony with your loved ones. Well, what happened in that monastery of Kosambi? A bhikkhu was careless in his physical actions. He didn't think about the well-being, the sensitivities of the resident monk. Here he is, an incoming monk, and he urinated, and he put the urine in some way that really wasn't very nice, was it? Well, that's what kicked off the whole thing. And then the other monk bore a grudge. What does that mean? He did not maintain careful, loving thoughts. He didn't make excuses for him in a nice way. He thought that so-and-so is like this and that. He became judgmental. He became huffy. And when he spoke, when he broke out into speech towards the monk who had apparently been in error over the urine, he didn't speak nicely. He spoke harshly. And of course, what do you expect a person to do when someone has accused them? First thing in the morning, you have barely wiped the sleep out of your eyes and you're being told what's wrong with you. Not many people are skillful and graceful enough to come back in a good way, in a harmonious way, to an accusation first thing in the morning. Most people can't do it any time. We really do have to be careful, even with our closest loved ones, you know. And so both of them kept thinking about it, working it up in their minds, thinking of the worst of the others, of the other one, and then broke out in speech to their students. Retaliation went back and forth, more wrong thinking, more wrong speaking. The whole thing blew up. It was a big mess. The Buddha counseled them. He said such beautiful words, talking about these 6 memorable qualities and explaining to them how they should be focused on spiritual practice. And you know what they responded? One monk said to him, how did he put it? He said, "Wait, Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One, the Lord of the Dhamma," that is the Buddha, "live at ease, devoted to a pleasant abiding here and now. We are the ones who will be responsible for the quarreling, brawling, wrangling, and dispute." In other words, he told the Buddha, go meditate and mind your own business. He told that to the Buddha. What kind of stubbornness is this? And the other monks, no one spoke up. They were in agreement. Let us have our quarrel. You go meditate. You go do that peaceful thing. Go do that peaceful thing. Go do that involved with this. And that's what they said to him. 3 times the Buddha appealed to them, saying, how did he put it? Enough, bhikkhus. Let there be no quarreling, brawling, wrangling, or dispute. No. So the Buddha said, what can I do? Even the Buddha himself cannot stop people who are stubbornly quarreling. It's a good thing to avoid a quarrel if one can, isn't it? If the Buddha himself can't unravel a quarrel between his own monks. Stubbornness is an amazing thing. And when people's pride and anger gets triggered, it can get ugly. So the Buddha went out for his alms round the next day, came back, packed up his room, put his outer robe over his shoulder, holding his bowl, his begging bowl. In other words, he's about to leave. He stood in the midst of all the monks, and he said some stanzas to them, uttered a poem, talking about people being obsessed by their own words and not really understanding what they're doing and so forth. And he said some verses that also appear elsewhere a number of times in the canon. He abused me, he struck me, he defeated me, he robbed me. And those who harbor thoughts like these, hatred will never be allayed. Hatred won't stop. For in this world, hatred is never allayed by further acts of hate. It is allayed by non-hatred, that is, loving kindness. That is the fixed and ageless law. Those others do not recognize that here we should restrain ourselves, but those wise ones who realize this at once end all their enmity. Hatred does not overcome hatred. You're not going to patch up your quarrels until somebody has a peaceful heart and is willing to be kind and forgiving. So if you think you're going to win with one more harsh word, perhaps you might like to think about it again. Then he goes on to say something I find very significant. He says, people who are breakers of bones, murderers, those who steal cattle, steal horses, wealth, pillage the entire realm, when even these kind of people can act together, why can you not do so too? Isn't it amazing how people can come together in some sort of concord with agreement, a meeting of minds, and do horrible things together? But people who would really like to live together in a virtuous, holy way can have such problems once they have gotten into some sort of quarrel. Cannot get along. Not until somebody comes up with a more peaceful attitude. So the Buddha left them. And then where did he go? He went and he stayed in a forest by himself for the whole rains retreat. And lay people were so irritated with these monks who had driven away the Lord Buddha so that they no longer could see him, didn't feed them. And that taught a lesson to the monks. They ended up becoming more manageable, ended up making up with each other. They ended their quarrel. Before the Buddha went off on that retreat, he stopped in and visited some monks who were living in a very different way. He stopped in at a park where 3 monks, Anuruddha and 2 friends of his, were living. The Buddha approached them, and the park keeper said, oh, stay out, recluse. There are monks in here who are meditating for their own good. Don't disturb them. But Anuruddha overheard him and said, no, don't stop the Blessed One. He's our teacher. And the Buddha came, and these 3 monks set up a seat for him and got water and saw to his comfort. And then he said to them, monks, are you living in harmony? Are you getting along? Are you abiding, diligent, ardent, resolute? And they said, surely we are, Venerable Sir. And he said, monks, how are you doing it? And they said, surely, Venerable Sir, we're living in concord with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water. Now milk and honey, even that can separate. Milk and water comes together. There's no differentiation at all. Viewing each other with kindly eyes. And he said, how do you do that? Remember, he had just seen all these disputes going on, this horrible, in Kosambi, where they're verbally attacking each other with verbal daggers, as the canon said. Well, Anuruddha answered him, Venerable Sir, how do we live thus? I think this way. It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me, that I am living with such companions in the holy life. I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness towards those venerable ones, both openly and privately. I maintain verbal acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. I maintain mental acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. I consider, why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? Then I set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do. We are different in body, Venerable Sir, but one in mind. And the other 2 monks said the same thing when he asked them. And then they explained how they abide diligent, ardent, and resolute. And they talked about the way they worked cooperatively. Whoever would come back first from alms round, getting their food from the village, would set out everything for, a comfortable spot for eating. They'd set out the water and the seats and so forth. And whoever came back last would eat any leftover food that had been left by the other 2, and would throw away any unneeded food in an appropriate way, and would clean up the site and put things away. And if someone needed help moving something heavy, like a big thing of water, they would gesture to each other with hand gestures. They wouldn't even talk unnecessarily. And they would meet frequently, sit down to talk about truth, to talk about the spiritual life, talking about things that are worth talking about. They didn't gossip and complain and babble to each other. They didn't waste their energy. But they talked about things that are worth talking about in a beautiful, harmonious way. And they said that abide diligent, ardent, and resolute. And he said to them, well, while you're doing this, have you developed yourself spiritually in any remarkable way? And they said, well, our meditation goes a little bit in a good way, but then we have this and that problem. And so on that occasion, he counseled them on the kinds of problems that can come up in meditation, and told them ways to overcome those problems. If you're ever interested and you have the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, the Majjhima Nikaya, you can find that in the Upakilesa Sutta on imperfections, number 128. That's middle-length discourses, or Majjhima Nikaya, number 128. And where the Buddha talked about those 6 memorable qualities, how to get along harmoniously, that was the Kosambhya Sutta, number 48. And the one, okay, and then, so then he gave them tips on what to do to have their meditations go more smoothly. And then he left. He had his retreat and so forth. On a later occasion, he visited these 3 monks again in a different park. Same thing happened. The park gatekeeper said, oh, they're practicing for their own good, don't disturb them. Anuruddha said, no, don't stop him. He came. He asked them again how blending like milk and water and so forth. And they gave him all the same answers. They described their lives together in all the same way. You can see how they are living together with those 6 memorable qualities. And what are those 6 memorable qualities again? The bodily acts of loving kindness, verbal acts of loving kindness, mental acts of loving kindness, being generous and sharing each other's things, sharing things with each other, not with each other, cupcake, and so forth. Being virtuous, living in a way that brings calmness to the household, and viewing life in terms of spiritual development as a priority. On that occasion, when the Buddha asked them if they'd had any kind of remarkable success in their practice, they said yes. And they described all the things that had happened in their practice that had led to greater and greater insight, greater and greater development. All 3 of them had become fully enlightened. And the Buddha praised them for their efforts. So living in this way, these 3 monks were able to find their way to complete freedom of the heart. I think that if we can live in these ways a little more every day, with bodily acts of loving kindness, verbal acts of loving kindness, mental acts of loving kindness, generosity and sharing, and living in great virtue, not doing all kinds of wrong things that you know would upset people, and letting spiritual practice be the focus of your life, I think that you have a good chance of harmony, of greater and greater happiness, peacefulness in your home. Perhaps if you are applying yourself very diligently to spiritual practice, you can find your way to remarkable states of understanding. So I like to offer my blessing to you. I'll do it in the old language of Pali first, and then in English. And I wish you well. And I hope you have happiness and harmony in your heart, in your heart, in your heart. Bhavatu sabha mangalang rakhantu sabha devata sambha bhuttanubhavena saraswati bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabha mangalang rakhantu sabha devata sambha dhammanubhavena saraswati bhavantu te. Bhavatu sama mangalang rakantu savadivata Sambhasangahanubhavi bhavantu te. May there be every good blessing. May the devas, that's the angels, may the devas protect you by the power of all the Buddhas, Dhammas, Sangha. May you forever be well. Thank you.